Je sais vieux, j'avoue, j'avanque. After the Franco-Prussian War, France was in ruins. The only thing the government could distract the French citizens with was its empire. At the turn of the 19th century, all the main European powers were looking into overseas colonies, so they jumped on board at the right time. Colonies were more than just a forefront, with people going to serve in the military, the army, and colonial officers and administrators. It was also a means of pop culture for vacations, exotic landscapes, unfamiliar people, dense jungles, vast deserts, and even places to work and gain even more franc in the empire than in France itself. So after the French Revolution, France saw it as their their destiny to spread revolution out of France, first in the European theatre of the French Empire under Napoleon Bonaparte I. They didn't see it as a right, they saw it as their destiny until Russia stopped Napoleon dead in his tracks, and he saw that why just stop at civilizing Europe when you could civilize non-Europeans as well. And even at the turn of the century, before the British were on board with their colonial expansion, he even tried to colonize Egypt at that point. So we're going to skip Napoleon, 1850s, Algeria, all of that good stuff, and just move to the 1880s, 1890s, where it really picked up and close enough to World War One as we can get. So the empire was becoming more and more important to France and their French citizens. We're going to the colonies to experience the exotic lands and the people and customs, but not always to work, but always more than likely to have more work as well. Colonies provided more money for land and opportunities, and the French actually wanted the more French citizens than actual foreigners at the time, like the Spaniards and the Portuguese and the British, which actually kind of formed up the France Legionnaire, which is the French Legion. I may have butchered that a bit, but the French Legion that were basically guarding the empire at the time. One thing to note is that the French Empire became such a pop culture icon that during the expeditions of the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s and 1990s, it was a central part, but especially in the turn of the century at 1900, the French actually gave the the French Empire itself, a whole booth to itself. That at the time was a big deal. So much so that literally brick by brick around this Eiffel Tower, whole town halls, mosques, churches, administrative buildings, even farmhouses and royal houses of the natives were brought back and built brick by brick. And citizens of the empire were brought as well, not just to show off, but to actually build the things back, of course. Also, for you feminists out there, women in the colonies were expected to kind of dash the ways of a normal woman in Europe, because, I mean, if you want to wear a dress that is suited for winter in the Sahara Desert, be my guest. If you want to walk around with your high heels in the dense jungles of the Ivory Coast and Morocco, be my guest. If you even want to bring a parcel to the Caribbean, which we pretty should, you can do that as well. But they were expected to dash the ways of a pompous feminist woman at the time and wear more rugged clothes. They could still be women in dresses and things, but the dresses were to be a bit over the ankles and like kind of jump suit kind of clothing were worn. Also, they would take part in humanitarian work, which most of their husbands did not, because the administrators of the empire were to have law and order, whether peacefully or violently. So it was funny how these women would come to these barren lands and start orphanage. I mean, the fact that I'm saying orphanages and hospitals really has to tell you what's going on in that situation. So most of them were basically there for their husbands, whether it was a lonely French worker working on a piece of land or a big administrator, like I was saying. We're going to get into the crown jewel now. Some notable colonies were the Ivory Coast, Abana, Dominica for a while, French American, Canada, especially Quebec, and we're going to cover French Canadian soldiers, but for now let's finish up Quebec. They had Martinique. They also had stakes in India, like I said before. I think I did, maybe not, but they had stakes in India. They also had a little bit of the Middle East before the downfall of the Ottoman Empire, and especially in Africa, scramble for Africa, they literally had the West Coast. We're talking Ivory Coast, Morocco, Algeria. I think they had Sudan. I believe they had Rhodesia as well. No, but a lot of African colonies, that's for sure, and a lot of overseas possessions. Oh yeah, can't forget Vietnam, Indochina to be exact, which is Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos, and they also had various elements in China, and even a little stake in, no, I think that's all the continents. They did go to Mexico, but that was to put Emperor Maximilian on or off the throne, I can't remember. But they did went to deal with Maximilian one way or another. So yeah, so France was basically all around the world, from the Caribbean islands to vast amounts of land in China to Indochina to even America, but all of America, United States America with Louisiana, Mexico with Maximilian, and Canada with Quebec and Newfoundland, and some scattered territory where the native Eskimo people live. So yeah, they basically had, even in Europe, they had Adonia for a while, microstate, look it up. And they also had, I think that's about it, from Asia to Africa to the Caribbean to the Americans, yeah, and that little microstate in Europe. But the crown jewel of the French Empire, as we all know, is Algeria. The most bloodiest war they fought over for their only colony, really. They did fight colonial wars after World War II, but Algeria was like, they had to hold on to it, but we'll get into that later. But Morocco and Algeria were their prized possessions and were like their prestige. Like the British had India and yada yada, like all that kind of stuff. But we're going to deal with some heavy topics. There were physical barriers between locals and settlers, so much so that even French people were starting to ants. Who were the real barbarians? Dense jungles, barren deserts. They did not turn a profit and were just useless to France at that point. The financial sector said the colonies would bring France riches and luxury, but that didn't even come, not by a bit. And what about morals? So far, Why would you go and risk your life on adventure? Why would you go and extort the people? And why would you try and run away from the motherland, whether you committed crimes or not? Why? I'm going to end with a quote now. Well, World War One thing, but I'm going to end with a quote now. By kind of end with a quote, but you know what? Let's do the World War first. So the only reason the natives, of course, gave in to the French were military superiority, and probably they kind of got brainwashed by the propaganda of the civilizing nation conquest thing, but they were mostly defeated by military standards. But by the time 1914 came around, it shattered the myth of French dominance and French invulnerability of a sort, and over 500,000 Arabics, Africans, Caribbeans, Chinese, Vietnamese, all throughout the empire, even the white settlers' children that were born in these countries that were part of France, even went out of their native lands to go and fight for the homeland. And it was not just Hitler who came back, not just Tojo, not Churchill, and especially not just Mussolini that came back, but Gandhi came back, and all other anti-colonial people at the time. So it was the beginning of the end for most things, the beginning of the end of the faith of God and the faith of Allah. It was the beginning of the end for complete monarchy, and it was also the beginning of the end for the empire. The empires that all the European countries had at that time. Austro-Hungary was the first to fall, but the dominoes would soon fall, even though they got to their peaks. And finally, the quote: whites do not communicate with the blacks or the yellow people, except to insuffer or massacre them. The only people who would be called barbarians know us only through our own crimes. It is our responsibility as Frenchmen to denounce the crimes being committed in our name. Terrible French accent, so let me just read that. Whites do not communicate with blacks or yellow people except to insuffer or massacre them. The people whom we call barbarians only know us through our own crimes. It is our responsibility as Frenchmen to denounce the crimes being committed in our name. Until France.